United States. Mississippi, Pascagoula, 1998. Many believe that we are alone in the universe. However, one day something inexplicable happened. Something that forced us to ask ourselves, is this really true? In October 1998, Mark Anderson, a 42-year-old mechanic from the small town of Pascagoula, Mississippi, had just finished an exceptionally exhausting day at work. It was a time when the shipyard where he worked was facing increasing problems with orders, and the workload often exceeded the employees' capacity. Mark, a man who valued routine and peace, was increasingly seeking solace away from the hustle and bustle. His favorite way to unwind from the stresses of daily life was evening fishing. He didn't even care about catching anything, but rather about the opportunity to find tranquility by the river. The water, silence, and absence of phones and noise that surrounded him in daily life were therapeutic for him. That evening, Mark felt a strong urge to go to the Pascagoula River. It was his oasis of calm, a place he had known since childhood. The river was serene, its waters slowly flowing along overgrown banks. And in the summer, the area buzzed with wildlife. But it was not summer, but fall that was his favorite time. The air had a chill to it, and the landscape around him was filled with a gold-orange panorama of falling leaves, which occasionally lazily drifted down to the surface of the water. Mark packed his old, worn fishing gear, tossing it into the trunk of his trusty pickup truck. Every item had its place. An old, battered reel, a flashlight, a thermos of hot coffee, and a folding chair he took with him on every trip. He knew he would be alone by the river. That was his space, one he did not share with anyone. His friends often told him that fishing was a boring activity, but for Mark, it was the essence of solitude that he cherished. He had endured a few difficult years, a divorce, losing contact with family, and although his job was stable, it no longer brought him satisfaction. These evening outings were moments where he could gather his thoughts, calm down, and disconnect from the outside world. Pascagoula was a small town where life moved slowly. Most of its residents had known each other for years, and gossip spread faster than any news on the radio. Mark disliked being the center of attention, so he avoided unnecessary interactions with neighbors, even though everyone respected him for his honest work and the calmness he always radiated. The road to the river, though not long, was picturesque. Mark turned on the radio but quickly turned it off. There was too much noise, and he needed silence. He enjoyed listening to the sounds of nature even before he reached the water. When he arrived, the sun had already set, and the sky had taken on a deep, navy hue. In the fall, evenings quickly turned cold, but that was just how he liked it. The chill in the air made him feel more alert, more aware of the world around him. The Pascagoula River was calm that evening, as if waiting for him. Mark set up his folding chair and cast his line. The sound of the water gently flowing over the rocks and the soft rustle of the wind in the tree branches immediately calmed him. He felt the tension that had accompanied him throughout the day begin to dissipate. This place was almost sacred to him. He had spent many evenings here, sitting alone, gazing at the stars, listening to the night sounds of nature. Countless times he had returned to the same spot, always certain that the river would not let him down. That evening, nothing indicated that it would be any different. The silence and tranquility, as always, filled the space around him. But Mark did not yet know that this evening would forever change his life. Something extraordinary was about to happen, something that neither his reason nor logic could explain. Around 9 p.m., when darkness had completely enveloped the landscape, Mark heard something that chilled his blood. It was a strange, pulsating sound that seemed otherworldly, deep, rhythmic, as if something was hovering low above the ground. It sounded both familiar and completely alien, making Mark feel uneasy. At first, he thought it might be the wind howling between the trees or some mechanical noise from a nearby facility. But the sound was different, too regular, too strong, almost like the heartbeat of a powerful machine. Confused and worried, Mark slowly rose from his folding chair and looked around. trying to locate the source of the noise. He glanced toward the river, for that was where the mysterious sound was emanating. Suddenly, something extraordinary caught his eye. A bright, pulsating light hovering above the water, just a dozen meters from the shore. At first glance, it might have looked like boat spotlights, but something was off. The light was not the typical diffuse glow of lamps he knew from evening fishing. Instead, it radiated a dazzling, almost organic luminescence that spread over the water in irregular yet distinct waves. The entire area was filled with this strange, cold glow, creating a surreal scene. Mark watched, mesmerized. His thoughts initially tried to find an explanation. Maybe it's a boat, maybe someone is playing with a flashlight. But he quickly realized that this was impossible. The light moved in a way he could not comprehend. It did not glide smoothly, as if it were bound to the water or something that moved across it. It hovered above the surface, then suddenly stopped in place, only to make a sharp move in another direction, without the sound of an engine, without the splash of waves breaking beneath a hull. There was something unsettling about the absence of any sounds that could suggest the presence of a human or a known machine. With each passing second, Mark became increasingly aware that what he was seeing was not something that could be easily explained. His heart began to race, but he could not tear his gaze away from the light. The sound that had initially seemed overwhelming now became almost a backdrop to this strange, hypnotic scene. The light began to approach him slowly, as if it were surveying the area. Mark instinctively took a step back, a chilling shiver coursing through his body. He was unsure whether to flee or to stay and observe. At that moment, he felt like prey that had been spotted by something high above it, not just physically, but also mentally. The light drew close enough for Mark to discern more details. It was not just a glow, as he had thought at first. At its center was an oval metallic object hovering above the water, without any visible signs of propulsion. The surface of the object was smooth, almost mirror-like, reflecting the moonlight and nearby trees while emitting its own cold luminescence. The object made no sounds. The noise he had heard earlier did not come from it, but now he felt that this entity was the source of that strange, pulsating sound that resonated deep within his mind, not just in the surrounding environment. Mark watched as the object began to rotate on its own axis, and the lights on its surface changed colors, from white to blue to purple. It was like witnessing something that defied the known laws of physics. Mark felt that something was approaching. The air around him became strangely thick, heavy, as if vibrating with some unknown energy. Before he could do anything, his body stiffened. He was paralyzed. Mark stared at this incredible sight as if time had come to a standstill. He wanted to move, to escape, to do anything, but his body refused to obey. He felt a sudden weight over his entire body, as if an invisible force was pressing him to the ground. Every muscle was paralyzed, and his mind was filled with the terrifying realization that he had no control over himself. His breath quickened, but his lungs seemed to struggle for each inhalation. His heart raced, even though inside, he felt utterly helpless. It was a feeling he had never experienced before. Absolute terror, combined with total vulnerability. The object, now fully visible, hovered just above him. It floated a few meters above the ground, and its lights flickered at regular intervals, casting cold blue beams on everything around. The silence that surrounded him was unnatural. No sound, not even the rustle of the wind or the splash of water, penetrated this impenetrable barrier of silence. At that moment, Mark felt that he was not alone. Before him, almost silently, 3 entities appeared. They floated above the ground, not touching it, as if suspended in the air by an invisible force. They were about 1.5 meters tall. Their thin, wrinkled bodies had a grayish hue that reminded him of something between aging skin and an organic material he had never seen before. Their arms were long and thin, ending in something resembling pincers, yet they moved with incredible precision. Mark noticed that their bodies seemed to shimmer in the light, as if covered by a thin layer of transparent substance. However, the most terrifying aspect was their eyes. Huge, shiny, devoid of pupils, yet full of intensity. Those eyes stared directly at Mark, as if examining every fragment of his being. Their faces were motionless, expressionless, like masks. There were no mouths, noses, or any other human features that could indicate emotions. These beings were something entirely alien, incomparable to anything Mark had ever seen. Mark tried to scream, but his body failed him. His throat constricted, as if it was restraining him from making a sound. He was trapped in his own body, unable to express the fear that was rising within him. The entities did not approach abruptly. They moved slowly and calmly, as if they were certain they had absolute control over him. When they were very close, Mark felt something strange, as if the force that had previously pressed him to the ground was now lifting him up. He felt no physical contact, yet his body began to rise. It was terrifying, yet fascinating, for he had never felt anything like it. It was an invisible, powerful force that was moving him toward the object. As he neared the metallic entity, Mark felt a strong tugging sensation in his chest, as if it were attempting to pull something out of him. Panic overcame him. He tried to resist, tried to free himself from this unseen grip, but the more he struggled, the stronger the force became. The strange sound from before grew louder, vibrating in his skull. In that moment, Mark felt as though his mind was being penetrated, as if these entities were attempting to access his thoughts. Suddenly, a bright flash engulfed him, blinding him temporarily. Mark instinctively shielded his eyes with his arms, feeling a heat wave wash over him. He lost consciousness, and all became dark. Mark awoke after an indeterminate time, gasping for breath. He lay on the ground by the river, feeling the cool air brushing against his skin. The strange light was gone, the unsettling sound had disappeared, and the creatures had vanished. He looked around, bewildered, trying to process what had just happened. His heart raced, and he felt disoriented. It took him a few moments to realize that he was completely alone. There was no sign of the beings, the light, or the metallic object. It was as if everything had been a dream. But the chill of the night and the coolness of the grass beneath him reminded him that this was all too real. Mark stood up, feeling shaky and disoriented. He fumbled for his fishing gear, which lay scattered around him. What had happened? Had he truly witnessed something from another world? The question haunted him as he hurriedly gathered his things, almost forgetting about his truck. He made his way back, still in disbelief. His heart pounded in his chest, and as he reached his pickup, he could hardly believe he had just experienced something inexplicable. Something he could not understand. Something that made him feel both small and insignificant, and yet deeply connected to the mysteries of the universe. He finally made his way home, not daring to look back, fearing what he might see. For weeks afterward, Mark could not shake the feeling that he was being watched. The strange sensation, the otherworldly entities, and the feeling of losing control over his body replayed in his mind like a broken record. He sought comfort in his daily routine, but the peace he once found in fishing was now overshadowed by the haunting memory of that night. Mark tried to tell his closest friends about what happened, but every time he began to explain, he was met with skepticism and disbelief. They would laugh, shrug it off, and say he had simply imagined it. This only added to his isolation. As the weeks turned into months, Mark became withdrawn. He no longer felt the urge to go fishing or to spend time outdoors. The quiet solitude he once cherished was replaced by a lingering fear of the unknown. However, he could not escape his thoughts. Each night, the images of those entities and the pulsing light haunted him, becoming a part of his very being. He began to read about UFO sightings and alien encounters, searching for anyone who could relate to his experience. He learned that he was not alone. Others had shared similar encounters, and many reported feelings of fear, confusion, and a sense of being changed forever. In his search for understanding, Mark discovered a community of people who had experienced the inexplicable. He attended meetings and listened to their stories, sharing his own in the hopes of finding closure. Although he found solace in knowing he was not alone, he also realized that he would carry the weight of that experience with him for the rest of his life. Mark eventually returned to the Pascagoula River, seeking to reclaim his sanctuary. He sat on the shore, the moonlight reflecting off the water, and contemplated what had happened that fateful night. He had once viewed the river as a place of peace and tranquility, but now it served as a constant reminder of the unknown. He knew he would never forget the beings he encountered, the strange alien figures that had invaded his life. Despite the fear that lingered, he also felt a strange sense of gratitude. His encounter had opened his eyes to the mysteries of the universe and the possibility that there was so much more beyond what he could see. Mark realized he had been given a glimpse into something profound, something that few would ever experience. As he sat there, he embraced both the fear and the wonder of the unknown. Don't be afraid to speak the truth. If you have your own story, experiences, or evidence related to UFOs, please email us. Your story is important and can help others who have had similar experiences. UFO X-Files connects us. You are not alone.